This week's adventure, Searching for Waterfalls, is brought to you by Squarespace. Well, I can hear rushing water, so that's a good sign. It just depends on what the waterfall's like. Sometimes these sounds sound really loud from a distance, and then you get there, it's just a trickle. Let's see what we have up ahead. Wow, this is really pretty. I just love the vibrant greens. They're just so intense this time of year. Now, most of the images that I've seen of this waterfall have been taken from where the camera is, which is not a bad view, but I'd really like to get a little bit closer to the main waterfall. I'm not sure how slippery these rocks are. Some of these pools are quite deep, so there's just no way I'm going to go inside those. Even with hip waders, I think some of them are a little deep. But I'll see if I can get up a little bit further, get a little bit closer, and get some of these cascades and perhaps some really mossy rocks in the foreground. So I was on the other side there, and it looks quite good, but of course as soon as you get closer to the waterfall, then you start to lose the mossy rocks. And on the other side there's a cedar tree that has branches coming down. It kind of blocks the view, so it's not great. So I decided to come on the other side of the creek, and of course it was really treacherous because it's extremely slippery and there's sections there that are quite deep. But I did manage to get across without getting water in my boots. I mean, it's no big deal if I get water in my boots, but it's just a bit of a pain hiking back. But the view from this side is really quite nice, and actually the rocks that I'm sitting on now and here, I think that if I just go back across the creek just slightly, I could probably get a really nice pano with a few of these mossy rocks and then the waterfall in the background. It's really nice in there. There's a really nice kind of a canyon or a grotto. The waterfall itself It's pretty, but it's not, it doesn't have any tiers or anything like that, so it's just going to be one big mass of white water, which is kind of a shame. So I'm going to have to really pay attention to my exposure, and perhaps do some really long exposures and then some shorter exposures, and then combine the two in Photoshop later on, because I'm not really that keen on that marshmallowy white effect. I like to have a little bit of detail in there, so I'll experiment a little bit. So I'm going to set up my camera, see what I can find just behind where the video camera is now, and I think it'll work quite well. All right, I think I found a spot to set up. It's really awkward just because it's so slippery and there's these deep pockets in the river here. But I found a little bit of a sandbar here, or gravel bar, so I'm standing on that, got my tripod set up on that. And I'm using the 23 to 64. I was going to use the wide angle, but I think it's just too wide, the 23 millimeter. The 32 to 64 is not quite wide enough, but what I'm going to do is just do a 2-image pano. There's some beautiful rocks, big boulders over to the left with lots of moss, and then of course we have the waterfall that's quite central, and then over here it's quite mossy as well. Now it does get a little bit messy with the trees, but there are some lovely ferns in there as well, so I'm hoping that'll work. And then in the mid-ground, or the first third of the image, there's some more boulders as well. It would have been great if I'd had all of the boulders that I had down there with the moss on them, but you know, these will just have to work for now. I put on a polarizer to get rid of some of that glare off the top of the water, and also there's some cliffs in here that have quite a bit of sheen on them. But I don't want to take too much out, because if I do that, then it'll just be very flat and won't have any dimension to it. So I'll take some with and without, and then, like I said before, I'll take some shots at a fast shutter speed to capture some of that action and get some detail in the waterfall, and also I'll slow it down to create a bit more of an ethereal look.
Since I started using the Fuji GFX 50R, I've never really tested out the dynamic range or how the camera actually handles deep shadows or underexposure. So this was a great opportunity to try that. As you can see, this waterfall is very bright, and it's catching quite a bit of ambient light from above, but at the same time we're in a deep canyon with lots of black rock. So what I did for this image, I took 5 vertical images and then combined them into a panorama. But rather than try to mix different exposures, say one for the waterfall and then one for the surrounding mossy rocks, I decided to just take one exposure for all 5 images. So I exposed for the whites, and in this case it's the waterfall, and they ended up with an exposure of 1 second at f14 at ISO 100. And as you can see, the image is quite underexposed, especially in the shadowed areas. As you can see in the final result here, I've tried to maintain as much detail in the waterfall or the whites as possible, but at the same time I've really opened up those shadows, especially on the right side. So the deep shadows are underexposed, but I was pleasantly surprised at how well the Fuji handled those underexposed shadows. The noise is minimal at best. So I know moving forward that if I come across a situation like this again and I do underexpose, then I don't have an awful lot to worry about when it comes to ruining those images because of noise. big thanks goes out to Squarespace for sponsoring this week's video and supporting my channel. If you're in the market for an easy to set up, elegant website, then why not head over to squarespace.com for a free trial. Whether you're a business or just want to share your art with the world, Squarespace has all of the tools that you'll need to create an all-inclusive website. Like what you find? Then use the code AdamGibbs for 10% off your first purchase. That's right, 10% off your first purchase with the code AdamGibbs. Out of all of the images in this video, this is one of my favorites because the composition is quite simple. Now, even though the composition is simple, it was one of the harder images to process. Because I'm quite low to the ground, looking straight across at the waterfall with a relatively long lens, in this case it was a 50mm, there was just no way that I could get everything in sharp focus, even if I was stopped down to f16 or f22. So I had to focus stack this particular composition. So what I did is I took one sharp image of the rock in the very foreground, midground and background, and my exposure was for the waterfall. So I got detail in the waterfall, and then I had to repeat the whole process, except this time I exposed for the rocks in the foreground, and then I combined all of those images. Something else that I had to do was I also took a number of images at a faster shutter speed because a lot of the foliage around the waterfall was moving at a slower shutter speed. So I also sandwiched that in and painted in those areas where the foliage was moving. So even though it looks like a relatively simple image, there was quite a lot of work involved to get it the way that I wanted it to look.
Alright, I think I found another composition. I just absolutely love these mossy boulders, but like I said before, most of them are down here, and then as soon as you go closer to the waterfall, they're not quite as mossy. But I think what I'm going to do in this image is make the waterfall somewhat of a focal point, but very small in the frame. I'm thinking of maybe doing a pano. So include this side of the creek and then the other side, and then just have the waterfall right in the middle. Now the reason why I've had to come kind of into the center of the creek here is because there's a dead tree kind of blocking the view if I'm on that side too far. So the further to the right, and then I can see the bottom of the waterfall. There is a lot of glare here, so I'm definitely going to have to use a polarizer for here. The light is really quite nice. It's very cloudy today. Now and then we'll get some spotty rain, but it's quite bright, except for in the canyon there. So I'm just going to set up. Ideally, I'd like to have this big boulder over here on one side, and these mossy rocks over here. So rather than do a pano with multiple images, this time I'm just going to use a wide angle lens, a 23mm, and then just crop it. It's just easier.
So after quite a bit of scrutiny, I decided not to go with the wide angle lens and went with the 32 to 64 and racked that lens all the way out to 64mm. The problem with the wide angle lens is that the waterfall just looked too insignificant, so I needed a longer focal length.
All right, well, that's me done for today. I'm glad I came here. It's a really neat area. I just absolutely love these mossy boulders and the ferns surrounding the creek here. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please be sure to give me a thumbs up if you did. And I think I will be coming back here some other day as well. This section here is really pretty. The only problem with this is that you can't really see the bottom of the waterfall, so you need to get a little bit higher. But oh well, we'll leave that for another day. The creek continues with lots of mossy boulders, but this is definitely the best bit. All right, everybody, thanks ever so much for joining me on this little adventure, and hopefully I'll see you next week. Okay, bye for now.